Welcome to the Aperture, a podcast for curious minds and critical social thinkers, hosted by me, Steph Cutler. If you believe a better world is worth consideration, then you're in good company. Each episode, I chat with someone with views and/or experiences of a social issue, and at the end, I hand over to a creative contributor who has the final say. On this episode, I'm joined by Marie-Claire O'Brien. Marie-Claire and I first met when we were appointed trustees of a charity board. And whilst we work in different parts of the social sector, we have a shared interest and commitment to developing and utilising lived experience to create social change. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Marie-Claire is a well-known and well-respected lived experience leader working in and around the criminal justice system. Amongst other things, she sits on the steering committee for the Prisoners Learning Alliance and on the expert panel of lived experience of the Criminal Justice Alliance. She's the founder and CEO of New Leaf, which has supported hundreds of male, female and young offenders to change their lives by taking a holistic approach and utilising the benefits of positive networks, education and lived experience. Gladly then, we're joined by Jason N. Smith as our poet on this episode. Jason combines his lived experience and his creative talents to produce a poem in response to my conversation with Marie-Claire. Jason has worked as a community support worker for CRC Probation in Stoke-on-Trent and is currently a development coach working with young people in care. He's also a trustee of Safe Ground, which develops programs for the justice system, so a perfect poet to join us today. But first, I'd recently learned that New Leaf had launched a lived experience network, and I wanted to ask Marie-Claire more about this and started by asking her how it came about.
As part of my dissertation at the end of my degree last year, I decided to do a study about people who are running their own organisations in the criminal justice system, but who have also got lived experience of the criminal justice system, as in they've been in prison or they've had convictions. So yeah, we had 51 responses from various leaders with lived experience throughout the UK. And yeah, so the network's just based on the findings from that study, really. And
so the idea behind it is to connect people?
It's sort of a two-tiered approach, the network. So you've got that upper level, if you like, the people that have been out for a while that are doing great things in the sector. But then because of COVID and a variety of other issues, we also need to provide an additional layer of support to people just being released from prison. So because of face-to-face services being reduced due to the infection rate, we need to look at other innovative ways of engaging prisoners as they're released, because regardless of COVID, people are still being released from prison, and it's like, what support can we give those people? So the idea behind the network is that we're going to form an online platform, if you like, where we can do all that work. But also we've got some really nice things planned, like we've got a conference planned with an awards ceremony, 6 awards for a variety of people with lived experience. So it feels really good, it feels really positive. There's been a lot of support from the sector, both network members and ally organisations. So yeah, it feels really good, and it's really good to be here talking about lived experience with you and what that actually means.
Because both you and I really value lived experience being something that can be a real catalyst for change in systems as well as change for individuals. How might this galvanising of people, lived experience leaders, start to tap into system change within the criminal justice system?
So I think they already are, to be honest with you. I think that's already been happening gently. The movement, if you like, let's call it the movement, the LEX movement, that Baljit Sandhu has kind of been a massive part of. And that's, I suppose, where I was first exposed to the idea of lived experience leadership and what that means and how we can support it, why it's important. We talk about it being a newish movement that's galvanising traction. But actually, lived experience leadership has been around for a long, long time. AA, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, was built on that kind of reciprocal, mutual aid kind of peer support, if you like. But I think what is new is just the knowledge around it as a mechanism for creating social change. And what the network is hoping to do is just bring together all of those wonderful but fragmented people like us that are kind of feeding into policy and changing policy, shifting things. But we're stronger together than we are apart, and it always feels to me like there's lots of pockets of great work going on, but that we're very siloed, and we're very, very much small fish in a large pond. And I think if we all join together, then that can only be a good thing.
But it does feel like the time is coming for a significant change in this field. Do you see this in your work more largely?
I think you're exactly right. The commissioning landscape's changed, so there's a much larger focus on lived experience leadership, and I think that language is what's so the core, the fundamental act of lived experience leadership has been around for ages, but the language has just very recently formed, and that's, like I say, thanks to Baljeet's work, I think, and the work of Unlimited and the big lottery, National Lottery Community Fund. So yeah, you're right, the funders are behind it, and they're really supporting or even galvanising a focus on lived experience leadership. And when, you know what it's like, Steph, when the funders get on board, everybody gets on board. So it's like the big thing now, because they need to tick that box. If we're being honest, a lot of organisations feel like they need to tick that lived experience box, which then leads to it becoming tokenistic and, all about bid candy. And that's been around for a while now, hasn't it? We've all heard of like service user engagement and stuff like that. And I think that's the lower end of the spectrum that's quite tokenistic. It leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth, because people that take part in that lower sort of level engagement aren't typically valued for that. It's more of an extraction exercise. Organisations will come and speak to service users and just extract what they need from them, and then there's a cliff edge for those participants.
It's referred to as service user engagement, but there's very little engagement actually, or it's quite one-off, isn't it, ad hoc?
What they often do is engage the disengaged, get them into a focus group or something with the promise of a voucher, and it, like we said, extract what they need from them, and then that's it. Those people go on their merry way, and then feel further disenfranchised, because, like you say, they've participated in something, they've bought in, but then there's no respectful follow-up given in terms of, you said this and we've done this on the back of that or as a result of that. But when it's done right, it's a really beautiful, powerful thing, as you know. I mean, it's what formed my organisation. This consultation with the communities that we serve is imperative if we're to create projects and services that truly meet the needs of the communities that we serve. So yeah, we're grounded in consultation and service user engagement. We're always doing consultations and speaking, just asking questions to the community that we serve, and being curious about the answers and actually doing something based on the answers. So yeah, I think we do it right, but I think we do it right because we're led by that lived experience. I've been on the other end of that.
Isn't that though because your organisation is largely led and run by people with lived experience of the system?
We're only led by people. So our board is made up of not necessarily just the criminal justice system, but of a variety of services that our people will have been in contact with. So homelessness services, youth justice and criminal justice. And then all of our staff, bar our office manager, have got that lived experience as well. So it really is top to the bottom in our organisation. We were speaking earlier, weren't we, about our first experiences of like service user engagement. And I think for me it was when I was in prison many years ago, like 13 years ago now. And, these researchers go into prisons, and I can remember I was paid with a Mars bar. I can't remember
Hang on. What?
I mean, you're laughing, but that Mars bar was like gold dust in that prison. But
okay. So it was a really good payment.
it could have been a worse payment, but yeah. So taking part in studies and consultations, having no clue really what they're about, just being like this passive participant, if you like, to tick a box for the researcher and the prison. So yeah, just passive is probably the best word for it. completely depoliticised when I was a prisoner myself. But then, you know, coming out of prison and having years and years out here of experiences, and then, you know, for whatever reason, deciding to activate that lived experience. And I think that's what we talk about. The difference between lived experience and lived experience leadership, I think, is that space in between where you decide to activate the most negative feelings that you have in your life in order to better support a community and create a service that's actually going to be used and valued and needed.
Both are needed in terms of system change, aren't they? We need people to have opportunities to meaningfully participate without feeling any obligation to take it to any sort of leadership level. And we need people with lived experience who do want to pursue a leadership journey to create system change and to support others, to have the opportunity to do that too. There's two levels there, isn't there?
It's almost like a continuum, isn't it?
It can be, can't it?
Yeah, and that's what the network's all about, really. It's been concerned with the cliff edge that's been happening around service user engagements. So there's lots of organisations out there that are led by lived experience leaders, and that are feeding into policy the views of the communities that they serve. But then, like we said about the cliff edge that happens after that has taken place, people are left alone again and disenfranchised, and the network's more around the sort of practical support and applications of that, you know, how we can really provide pathways of progression for people, but then also support them if they do want to tap into attending focus groups for Revolving Doors Agency or feeding into probation reform consultations. So like you said, at any level, people should be able to decide whether to leave it there or whether to continue the journey. And I think in terms of continuing the journey, we need to put certain things in place to make that more supportive and more connected, more streamlined.
What was it that took you from passive whilst in prison to the LEX leader that you now are? This is for me, or I could do this, I can do this.
When I was in prison, I was in a completely different headspace to where I've been the rest of my life, and I think that was all due to my offence, carrying a lot of guilt and shame and regret around that. Yeah. Where I'd had a car crash, Steph, where my friend died unfortunately due to me drink driving, so you can imagine the feelings around that. With the family, I want them to know that I'm accountable. I'm not trying to hide away from what I did and what happened, but yeah, they're always on my mind, and I'm always really conscious of not making it worse for them. So in terms of being in prison and feeling able, willing to activate that lived experience, I just wasn't in that headspace at all. It was more just to get your head down, get through it, and get back out to the people that you care about ultimately, you know, pay your price to society. And if you said to me, you know, on the day that I left prison, you'll be heading back into those gates one day and it will be your career and you'll love it, I would have laughed at you and just said absolutely no way.
Yeah.
It was the furthest thing away from my mind.
Yeah, you're managing emotions and your thoughts and things that have happened to you. That's too difficult at that time to contemplate anything beyond. And I think actually often you don't even know there are opportunities beyond it, because why would you?
I was a corporate person, so I come from a sort of quite corporate background of estate agency and mortgage advising. Nursed my dad through lung cancer, which sent me off the rails, and being off the rails is what led to my horrific offence that was so catastrophic for my friend and his family. So on the back of all that, there was no inkling that I was capable or had the potential of doing anything like this, really. And that's been a real journey. And where that journey started, I was at a real crossroads, I think. I was a stay-at-home mum. I'd just had my son was kind of 2.5, and I separated from my partner. Obviously was thinking I need to get back into the world of work, and what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to corporate, and which is really well paid? I was earning a lot of money in my late teens, early 20s. So I thought I could go back to that, but really didn't feel drawn to it. Felt a bit turned off by it because it was so soulless. And then a friend of mine who worked for a youth offending team, she had a volunteering opportunity, fell on her lap to work with women coming out of prison as a mentor. And I just, honestly, I was just like, no, I haven't got the skills that they need. I just felt completely inadequate in applying for that role. But, you know, was encouraged to do so and had a conversation, and they were like, you're exactly the kind of person that we want because of your lived experience of being in prison. So the thing that was making me think I couldn't do it and I wouldn't be attractive as a, you know, as a volunteer even to give up my time, or that I'd be too risky, was the thing that made me really attractive, because they knew that it would help with engagement of these women. And for me, it was all a new concept. I'd done a bit of peer mentoring in prison and stuff when I did the drug rehab. So it was a concept that I knew about, but it's different in prison when you're out of prison. And I was intrigued to see how the relationship would work. And honestly, since that day, sort of 6 years ago now, and we've had over 500 people use the service and access the service, it continues to shock and surprise me pleasantly how relationships shift and support people to make better decisions in their lives. New Leaf was born basically from that volunteering opportunity, and then working for various other charities and realising I could probably do a better job myself, getting my confidence up there, and doing a consultation where the community themselves told me what they needed. It was, you know, they were like, we want people like you, relatable role models, I think was the term that was used, to show us how to access opportunities. And it just made complete sense to me. It was like, yeah, of course you do.
Well, it is so obvious, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's so obvious. And so really what you're saying is that it almost took somebody to see the value of your own lived experience before you did yourself.
And it's that part there for me that really blew my head off, because for me, my lived experience was, it was just that. It was just part of my journey. It was how other people reacted to that that made me see, I can use this. I can use this as a tool to engage people and to shine a light on certain issues that I witnessed. And yeah, it just sort of made me realise that actually I can use this as a bit of a platform, not just for me, but for others, to elevate the voices of others. And it was just a magic moment, I think. And then also seeing other people, other leaders, you know, when I was in those kind of lower level roles, earning 50 quid a day or volunteering, seeing those other leaders that were further along, having a platform and speaking to policymakers and decision makers, and just really opened my eyes and made me say, wow, like, look what can be achieved. She's got a conviction, and look at the career and the respect that she's carved out for herself. Yeah. In spite of that, or maybe even because of that. Yeah. And it's fireworks going off all over the place around that sort of time, around sort of 6, 7, 8 years ago. And then, like I say, just a couple of years of just really immersing myself in the criminal justice sector, and then started New Leaf, and I've never looked back, honestly. It's the job of my dreams. They say if you do it for free, it's the career for you, and I did it for free for 3 years. And it's definitely the career for me.
How do you find that the policymakers, the decision makers, respond to the likes of New Leaf and this growing LEX movement?
It can still be quite tokenistic. It can be done quite badly. But I think now they're starting to realise that they're missing a trick. So, for example, we've got the funders on board now, but we've also got like HMPPS, which is Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service. They have a strategy now, which I literally saw last week, around employing people with lived experience and creating pathways for ex-prisoners to become civil servants and work within the system to make it better, to challenge, you know, the way that they do things, to challenge the risk-averse language that I constantly see that leaves no room for rehabilitative culture and things like that. So it is really exciting. I feel like we're on the crest of a huge tidal wave that's been building for a long time. I'm just really excited to see where that goes and how it pans out. And it's not going to be smooth sailing, but at least people and organisations and institutions are willing to, you know, spend money and do it credibly rather than just do it as an extraction exercise.
Obvious question, but what are the benefits for engaging and employing and, you know, valuing the lived experience of the people who've been part of a system that you're in charge of managing, for example?
Okay, so I think you've got this sort of ethical and moral reasoning, haven't you? You know, for HMPPS, for example, or the system, criminal justice system, to preach about rehabilitation and, you know, to try and get employers to give second chances to ex-prisoners and stuff, that's all great, that's wonderful, but if you're not doing it yourselves, it's a bit it's a bit hypocritical and leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So I think there's been that challenge from us for a while, you know, practice what you preach. Why are you sifting people with convictions out of the process when actually they've served their time and so they're rehabilitated? Are you saying that there's nothing there for people that bother to rehabilitate themselves? Are you saying that, you know, you'll never give them a chance again? And there's been that kind of gentle challenging going on for years now, and they're finally starting to listen, which is great. You've already got people within your organisation that have convictions. I've got a friend that's a governor of a prison who has got 80 odd previous convictions from when he was a youth. You know, he's been working in the service for many years. There's other statutory managers, like probation managers, that I've spoken to that have got previous convictions. There's 11 million of us out there. We are working within the system as it stands, but the problem is that people aren't allowed to talk about it. It's seen as this dark mark that they should be ashamed of, and the stigma continues. So my challenge to HMPPS was, it's all great doing this new piece of work about attracting people with convictions into the service and you know, really being a leader in that, but actually what about the people that you're already employing that can't be authentic about their previous lives? Or, you know, they may want to talk about it, they may not want to talk about it, but don't you think there's some work to be done to support them? And we need to lift the stigma around what rehabilitation looks like, if that's what we're striving for, and focus less on risk and less how the public might perceive us, and just more on what we're trying to achieve, which is ultimately fewer victims of crime, less people in prison, because it costs too much, a more happy society. It's really not rocket science. At the moment, the biggest reason is the economic impetus around, you know, we've got less money and we need to do more work with that. So when you employ lived experience eyes or perspectives, it's a common sense approach in my mind. It's like, we can see the gaps that need filling, we can see the pathways that are broken and that you know, that really need to be mended if people are going to progress, for example. So, you know, some of our guys that we support coming out of prison, they breached on the first weekend they were out, and you'd look at that, or the system would look at that and say, these men have failed, they've failed, they're clearly not rehabilitated, let's lock them back up again. But for us, it was around seeing their journey. Well, actually, you kick them out of prison on the Friday with £4.60, and they had to get to Crewe with £4.60, which is like 100 miles away. How are you expecting them to do that? That's why they got breached, not because they failed, it's because the system has failed them. I think it's just getting to the crux of the matter, if I'm honest, just working out where the problems are and just seeing the easy, most linear way to fix those problems. So it's cost effective for the system to employ us because we know where it's failing.
Sometimes we don't mince our words.
Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it can be both. If you really, really understand because you've lived it, then actually it's obvious, and the obvious things can get overlooked by those working on a system but quite removed from it. They sometimes overcomplicate it.
So for me, I think it's that passion is what it comes down to with that. Passion and risk always. So the reason that we're kind of sought after is because we're passionate and we'll do a lot more. So, you know, if somebody pays me 20 grand a year to do a job using my lived experience, I'm going to give you 40 grand's worth of employee. Do you know what I mean? Because I just care so much about the job that I'm doing. So yeah, they're getting a lot more bang for their buck. It makes complete sense at the moment when we're having to work smarter rather than harder. But I think from the lived experience side as well, we need to be cautious around a few things. So I think sometimes our passion can on the side of unmanageability or unprofessionalism, and this is a real quandary for me, because it's like, let's talk about lived experience leadership pathways. We want to help people to like professionalise, don't we? You know, if you want to get additional skills, we absolutely should be supporting that. But we also need to be careful, for example, that with probation using lived experience mentors, you know, that we don't assimilate people into the problem. What I mean when I say that is you don't want to dilute the lived experience or sand it off so much, you know, sand off that rawness and that passion and that, you know, the stuff that makes us, the stuff that makes, you know, the magic side.
It's that authenticity, yeah.
Authenticity, the credibility. You don't want to sand that off so much or make it so much less that we become part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. So don't try and assimilate us into the system, because actually the reason why you were attracted to us in the first place is because of how different we are. So I had an example of that a couple of weeks ago with one of our contracts, where we're doing a really great job with this contract. It's a new contract, it's been going for a month. But one of the concerns of the statutory agency involved was that we don't manage, or we don't consider risk the way that they do, and in a way that they see as being safe. So we should know the risk of every person that we support and what they've done, as in what crime they've committed. And we were like, well, we don't need to know that really, because we're not about that. We're about how supporting people to progress away from those labels and that stigma. And there was this real kind of tension between the two, and I actually was called naive. Like, so one of these statutory employees said, I think you're being a bit naive. And I was like, I find that so offensive. And the reason I find it offensive is because I've navigated this system as a service user and navigated risk at a time when nobody else was managing the risk around me. Nobody else cared enough to manage the risk around me as a prisoner. I've navigated, you know, being a lap dancer for 2.5 years before my sentence. I've navigated being a victim of knife crime. I've navigated the death of my father. The one thing that they cannot use in a sentence with me, word-wise, is naive. And I just said, I think that's so rude. It's not, if anything, we're desensitised to risk because we've been exposed to it so much. Do you know what I mean? And we've just got a different perspective. And I think for me, that's the clincher in the criminal justice system. And it's this notion of risk. So you've got the statutory agencies that are purely focused on risk and how we manage that, both in prison and out in the community. And then you've got agencies like ours that are led by lived experience that don't give a hoot about what you did in the past. Really, we care about how you're presenting today and your motivations and how we can help you get from A to B to C to Y, you know what I mean? So yeah, there's just this huge disparity between the approaches, and I know that we've got it right because all the research and papers and desistance theory tells us that we've got it right. It's all about relationships and people moving away from the label of offender. But what we're constantly battling with is the system, which is always dragging us back to this notion of risk.
Is there a connection between risk and people being potentially disruptive?
If you're in the tech sector and you are an innovator, you're seen as a disruptor, and that's a really positive thing. You know, it's positive because it's probably cheaper, faster, more efficient, whatever. I mean, in my study that I did last year, one of the participants said it really eloquently. He was in addiction and he was just entering into recovery, and he could see loads of gaps in the services, loads of things that weren't working. So he started challenging them. He started challenging them quite vocally, and was seen as being a disruptive influence. And he was actually barred from a lot of the recovery meetings that he was a part of for that reason. So this guy created his own service and now runs a multi-million-pound turnover charity that supports hundreds and hundreds of people into recovery every year. So he clearly knew what he was on about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But he was seen as not knowing what he was on about. So I think, and that's what I mean. It's like, how do we support people to speak their truth, but have their truth respected as well? Like, and I think that comes with networks, and that comes with business networks like the New Leaf network. You know, that comes from us all supporting each other and all giving each other confidence and the courage to stand, the courage of our convictions, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah. Thanks go to Marie Claire for sharing her wisdom, her worthy aims and her wonderful spirit. And now over to our guest poet. Jason N. Smith has performed his poetry at London's Roundhouse, the Royal Festival Hall and Tate Modern, to name but just a few prestigious venues. He's also featured at several literature festivals, including Twice Reading at London's Literature Festival. He's been involved in the BBC's Listening Project and National Prison Radio. Jason has published a collection of his poetry called Beyond Words and has released an album and a book. Very happy to hand over to Jason N. Smith to have the final word.
Sometimes I speak words intellectual and contextual to the mind's thought schematical patterns, to alter perceptions, conceptions, with hope broadband connections get connected and fibre optics shine straight and don't deviate. Because our lived experience holds a power beyond smartphones, CPUs, panoramic social media, TV, news, even beyond fickle internal views. So come, join dot-to-dot constellations of words and weave internet network neural paths of binary double minds of creative maths and achieve a singularity. And then, in your singularity, form a common unity community and you will see, where two or more are gathered, the very definition of resettlement can be socially changed to settlement with no token semblance of recognition for transition from recidivism to desistance. Because listen, when we activate the space between brain, thought and dream sublime, we find lived experience leadership can modify systems we left behind. You see, I vigorously chiseled away institutionalization's locks, while time's healing waves washed away rubber stamps demarking me as stuff. And I have not stopped. After unraveling rolls of razor wire constricting vocal cords with deepest, darkest thoughts. Because I talk words like foreign bodies inserted into ecosystems of carnivorous thoughts to cause reacting attacks and a devouring of ideas along neural paths, so that, perhaps, collectively, we create such a didactic discourse it beats uproar and House of Lords door demanding reform. Because we are born into the world with so much to offer, but within a capitalising mass production of assets offsetting taxes, we become just a number. But even when released in prison no longer, having paid the bill with coinage of time for our crimes, why is it ex-prisoners suffer stigma and are still labelled offender?
That's it from me, Steph Cutler. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe so you don't miss a future episode of The Aperture on Apple, Spotify, YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts from. Please like, share, leave a review, and The Aperture can be found on Facebook and Twitter. This episode of The Aperture was produced by VI Podcasting. See you next time for more social change thinking.